I'd like now to invite Chris Herring up to the podium. She has accepted the honor of introducing our keynote speaker, Dr. Seefeld.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today and to introduce a friend and former colleague of mine, Dr. Andrew Seefeld. Dr. Seefeld is a board-certified emergency medicine physician practicing in Plymouth, New Hampshire. Dr. Seefeld is the medical director of the emergency department and director of emergency medical services and trauma services at Speare Memorial Hospital. He graduated from UCLA with a Bachelor of Science in Psychobiology and a minor in anthropology. He attended Pennsylvania State College of Medicine, where he received his doctorate in medicine. Dr. Seefeld is a highly valued partner of CADY, and we are very grateful for his medical expertise and his willingness to help raise awareness on substance use disorder and stigma reduction. Please help me welcome Dr. Seefeld to present The Science of Addiction and the Path to Emotional Sobriety.
Let's see if we can get this. Can you guys hear me? Microphone's working? Yep. All right. Who is in charge here? Is this me? I guess if I click forward. Oh, look at this. How is everyone feeling today? Who likes to feel good? Who likes to feel bad? Who likes to feel anxious? Yeah, no, I don't see a lot of hands. I like anxiety. I became addicted to anxiety. I like depression. I became addicted to depression. That's kind of how I got here. You can hear it in my voice right now. And it will probably get better as I move through this talk. So what am I thinking? You know, I wake up this morning. I know I have to do this talk. I've got a huge group. My thought addiction is I'm not good enough. And that comes from childhood. And when I have that thought, I have an emotional state, a feeling state that's associated with that. I'm feeling nervous, anxious, my heart rate's going up, my voice might crack a little bit, I might get a little nauseous and sweaty. These are all physiologic conditions in my internal chemistry that is related to a thought. Is there any truth to the thought? I could ask, am I good enough? And you could look at me and say, no, you're terrible. Then I can look at that. But for the most part, my thought addiction from childhood, there's no truth. And actually, my experience in life says the opposite, that I'm actually quite good at. So behavior, and what we're gonna really focus on here is how our thoughts, our subsequent feelings and emotions, which might come together, and our behaviors are interrelated. Because when we're talking about drug use, alcoholism, gambling addiction, social media addiction, we're talking about a behavior. Right? Drinking alcohol, I'm drinking, that's a behavior. Smoking cigarettes, smoking marijuana, that's a behavior. I'm smoking. Why am I doing these things? Why am I on my cell phone 20 hours a day? Why is my kid watching TikToks all day long? Those are behaviors. Move backwards. Let's move upstream. What's the thinking going on? What's the emotional state that we're trying to distract from? So what did I do today? I got up, I meditated, I might have reviewed my talk with my lovely wife. And I showed up, despite my thinking and my emotional states telling me to not show up, to come up with an excuse. I'm busy, maybe I have to go to the hospital to work something out. I don't want to do this. My internal chemistry says don't show up. So what do? I show up, and I continue to show up. I continue to choose a behavior that is not in alignment with my thinking. What happens over time? My thinking and my emotional states transform. I'm transforming that part of my brain that was developed when I was 2 and 3 years of age, the limbic system, which we'll learn about, that wants me to think I'm not good enough, wants me to live in depression and anxiety, and now I'm okay. I'm kind of a walking description of what I'm talking about if you know my whole story. Here's a picture. Now, you know, you could put pictures up. I mean, we just had a horrible shooting in Texas. You know, we've got the pandemic. I mean, there's so many pictures I could put up. But this picture will conjure up a thought for you. It's a homeless lady, a homeless mother with 2 homeless kids asking for money. There's going to be an emotional state attached to this. You know, you may get sad, you may feel, you know, remind yourself of maybe some stuff in your past. And then there's a behavior. What is the behavior? What are we going to do about this? Who am I going to be in the world to facilitate an adaptive change for this family? But that's a choice. So we're going to go through some basics here, and this might be remedial, but it is what it is. And I remember there's both sides to this room, so I'm going to try to walk back and forth. But so external stimuli. This is just, you walk out in the world today, you're going to hear things. You go on your phone, you're going to read things, you're going to smell things. This is just what happens as humans. So we're constantly being bombarded with external stimuli. That is going to lead to thoughts, which then will lead to an emotion and a feeling. Okay, if I'm walking in the woods and I see a bear, I'll have a thought, I'm going to die. I'm going to probably have an immediate physiologic response. My heart rate's going to go up and I'm going to want to run. You know, that's physiology. And then there's the behavior. What's the behavior if the bear is coming at me? Slowly walk away. Okay, so think of that analogy as we move through here. So what are external stimuli? I kind of went through this. What I see, what I hear, what I feel, you know, tactile, what I smell. These are stimuli. What I taste. Thoughts. What are thoughts? Do we know what thoughts are? They're ideas. They're opinions. They're beliefs. Where do they come from? They come from life experiences, right? What am I growing up like? Genetics play a role, this concept of epigenetics, which is a whole nother talk. In education. So my thinking pattern was shaped from my upbringing, where I went to school, what my parents talked about, what my peer group talked about. This is how I developed a thinking pattern. These are conscious processes for the most part. I see the bear, I'm going to think I'm going to die. That's a conscious thing. Emotions. And I keep things simple, okay? Emotions and feelings. Yes, there's emotions and the feelings are subjective. Right now I'm anxious, my feelings are nausea, maybe a little sweaty, my heart rate goes up, okay? But for the purposes of this talk, let's just lump them together, okay? So big emotions, happiness, sadness, and there's plenty of others that we've coined. Fear, disgust, anger, surprise. And emotions are important for survival. And this talk is a lot about survival and how the brain gets hijacked with addiction. So if I didn't experience fear when I see the bear and I said to myself, I'm happy, and I sat down and had my sandwich, that might be a problem. I suspect that caveman did not make it, okay? You know, sadness, that's a human trait. You know, there's a purpose for sadness. Happiness, we all love happiness. I think that's part of the biggest breakdown is the human condition is we're always seeking to be happy and feel good. We'll get to that. Fear and anger. Anger is adaptive. Anger has a role, you know. We wouldn't have survived if we didn't have a mechanism for anger. But we live in a different reality today. We're not out on a tundra fighting for survival. We live in nice homes, and we've got food at grocery stores, and so on and so forth. So for our cavemen, lived in a completely different reality. These tend to be subconscious. I doubt I'll get to a point where I will be so emotionally present that I can feel good with a bear chasing me. It is fight or flight. It is what it is. And you guys can see that because my thought addiction of not good enough hits me so quickly that I immediately feel, you feel it in your chest, you feel it in your stomach. You should see me at work. The nurses know. And you can just see it in my face. I made a mistake. Oh, it drops you. So behavior, and this is where I'm going to put two words out to you, adaptive and maladaptive. And we'll kind of go through those. Behaviors can be conscious, okay, a conscious choice. I see the bear, I feel anxiety, fear, I consciously choose to slowly walk away. They can be also subconscious, and in the realm of addiction, we are looking at a subconscious circuit. Okay, for the alcoholic who is drinking alcoholically, they've lost access to choice, and they are now drinking despite everything in the outside world saying you shouldn't drink, okay? And we'll go through that. I like to look at behaviors as adaptive. Adaptive behaviors bring people together. They facilitate connection. What is the opposite of connection? It's addiction. It's disconnection. Think about that. If you see people who are suffering with addictive behaviors, they're isolating. They're on their phones, sitting in their room, watching the 24 hours of TV or whatever we heard there. You know, they're drinking themselves to death in a hotel room. They're under a bridge with a needle in their arm by themselves, right? So that's disconnection. That's not adaptive. Adaptive is connecting with one another. Maladaptive, we simply just described it. Maladaptive results in disconnection from the world. Human beings want to connect. That's the reality. Connection feels good. Coming in here and seeing Tara and giving her a hug felt good. I love seeing Deb. I mean, that felt good. That gave me a burst of energy. That's connection, okay? So again, external stimuli. You're going to go out in the world. You may be doing it right now. I am a stimuli right now. I am saying words, and you are going to hear my words. You are going to generate thoughts from my words. You're going to have an emotional and a feeling connection. Good, bad, right, wrong, who cares? It is what it is. And then there'll be a behavior. You know, you may disconnect from me. You may say, hey, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You go to your cell phone, you disconnect. Maybe you're engaged and you're like, this is great. It's all a behavior, okay? So who is affected by addiction? Anybody. I would almost go out and say that the human condition is an addictive condition. Now, if you want to get into what type of addictions, that's where you can start dividing people up. But the purposes of this talk is to really identify that we're not really dealing with the substance. We're talking about a behavior as related to an emotional state, which is likely related to a thought process. So if we become too myopic and we try to isolate into this drug or that alcohol or this nicotine or that gambling, we lose the opportunity to affect change for everyone. So why do we become addicted? Genetics certainly play a role. Okay, we know this. And I'm not a neuroscientist, so this is probably somewhat remedial for anyone who studies this from a physiologic standpoint, but I think you'll get the point. Brain circuits or neurochemistry plays a role in addiction. We know that. The environment that we live into, the environment that we were raised in, plays a role in addictive behaviors. Adverse childhood experiences, and we already had a really good introduction to that, and that right there, I would say, is 99% of our issue. It's the reality that we were born into, which then begat the next behavior, and eventually the addictive behaviors. So what is addiction? And this is probably going to throw some people off because I'm a medical doctor and I like diagnosis and diagnosis codes and the DSM-5 and all that. But I asked myself, I said, what are we really talking about here? You know, and I look at myself, I think, yeah, I've had some maladaptive behaviors in the past. Okay, that was a result of emotional stuff, depression, anxiety. Well, what was that result of? That was a result of thought. Interesting. So there's thought addictions. This is my proposal, okay? Thought addictions lead to emotional addictions. We're going to go through some examples. And those lead to the behavioral addictions, and that's it. Okay? Simple. I like to keep things simple. So thought addiction, this is my big one, one of my big ones. I have almost all of them, to be honest with you, and maybe some of you do too. I need to be liked. Okay? And I'm not going to go through specifics here, but maybe a little bit. I can't do anything right. Now remember, this started for me when I was 2, 3, 4 years of age. It started for all of us. It doesn't make our parents bad or wrong. It just is what it is. It's a growing brain for a baby. If they're scolded, they learn they're not doing it right. Okay? You do that to a kid numerous times, they really learn they're not doing it right. I'm unlovable. That's a good one. I am not good enough. Okay, I'm an identical twin. We're both very alpha, kind of athletic, competing human beings. Imagine what that household was like. right? So you already got one kid who's like addicted to thought addictions of not good enough, and now you throw his doppelganger literally right next to him, and we're both competing for the same, 2 parrots. Wow. He's one of my best friends today. I'm not important. So what are emotional addictions? Anxiety is an emotional addiction. My daughter's addicted to anxiety, 100%. She'll own it. That's a result of her adverse childhood experiences growing up with a mother and father that kind of created chaos for 10 years of her life. Depression, this was my big one. I got diagnosed with major depression when I was 13. Did I have major depressive disorder? I had a thought addiction of not good enough, and then I had these emotional states. But I didn't have a family that really helped me understand the emotional states, and that's the biggest breakdown today, is that we need to facilitate understanding for our children, not distraction from said emotion, movement into said emotion, and understanding why, and that it's okay to feel that way. Victim, I'm good at this. Victim-oriented, we see it all the time. Go on Facebook, you'll see the victim-oriented communication, why me, what the world is doing to me. That is not adaptive in the long run or even the short run. It's an addiction. You get dopamine released in the brain when you victimize and someone rescues you. It feels good to be rescued. That's why we do victim, okay? I always love this one, self-righteous. Now I'm addicted to being right because I need to always be right. I chose a profession that is literally perfect for my addiction of not good enough and needing to be right. An emergency doctor, right? We don't get to be wrong, because if we're wrong, people die. Now, am I ever wrong? Absolutely. But what a great subconscious choice as a young man to choose a profession that I can continue to use to beat myself up for a lifetime. Thank goodness I see it today, and anyone who works with me today has a different experience with Andrew, the doctor in the emergency department, than you did 5 years ago, I guarantee it. And you can feel free to ask. Desire and love. The thought addiction, I'm unlovable. I go out in the world and I'm addicted to finding the next one. I need to be loved. So I may date a lot, serial monogamy, all that stuff. So behavior, and again, this isn't to minimize this concept that alcohol affects the brain. Yes, the substance is a problem. But think of the behavior is really what we're talking about. We're talking about drinking because of something. I've never met an alcoholic in recovery who said, I just love to get drunk. That's why when we talk about mental health as different from substance use disorder, I don't get it. Because there's abusing substances because of mental health. It's an emotional breakdown. It's a thinking breakdown. Work on those two things and they're not going to choose to drink anymore. It doesn't mean that you can become so emotionally sober that the alcoholic can go out and drink. There's a change in the brain that's occurred. Alcohol's never going to work for me. That's okay. I have no desire to distract from my emotions, and that's what emotional sobriety is, and we'll learn about that. Using drugs, right? Using drugs, smoking marijuana, that's a behavior. Snorting cocaine, injecting fentanyl. Eating, not eating, that's one. So, am I overeating? I do that. Do I starve myself? Absolutely. Right? Why am I doing that? Okay? I'm sure some of these are hitting home to individuals, and that's awesome. Feel those feelings. Smoking, it's a behavior. Vaping, that's a pandemic, huh? Jeez. So the nicotine's a problem, right? We already know what nicotine does to the dopamine, but it's the behavior is what, if you weren't doing the behavior of smoking, you wouldn't be vaping because you can't do both. Exercising, fully, I might have been swimming at an hour before this to just unload a little bit of stress, but I only worked out for 5 minutes, I promise. You can ask my wife. Look, am I perfect? Absolutely not. Do I still have addictive behavioral patterns? Yes. Would I say for the most part they're adaptive? 100%. So exercise addicts. Enabling is an addiction, is a behavioral addiction. I joked with Deb this morning. I said, I'm not good enough. And she said, you're going to be great. And I said, Deb, don't enable me. You should tell me I'm going to do terrible. I love Deb. But it's what it is, We want to rescue our children. We want to, I tell my kids to do the garbage, or I'm not going to give them allowance. My wife and I are terrible at this. The Sunday comes around, we're like, well, you did half of it. Really, guys? No, you really didn't do it. We're enabling your laziness by giving you kudos for not showing up for yourselves and for the family. I'm keeping them sick. We can see that today. We're works in progress. Social media and gaming, I mean, I think there was that hit me. I almost teared up there. Just nausea, just thinking, my daughter does this. We have, I was out, like all of us that are, I'm in my 40s, I was out playing, I didn't have social media, I didn't have TikToks. Social media and gaming is probably one of the most pervasive addictions out there today. Some of us adults have this. I'd say many of us do. Okay, think about that. Every time you think of the fentanyl and the alcoholism, think about the person that can't get off Facebook, okay, or can't get off Twitter, or constantly looking at their phone. That's addiction, okay? And then gambling. So we'll move a little bit quicker. Sex is a behavioral addiction. People ask me, well, Andrew, how do I know if I'm addicted? What is really the definition of addiction? Addiction is occurring for the individual if the behavior is compulsive, meaning it's continuously going on, and it's continuing despite harmful consequences. So you just have to ask yourself, if I'm drinking alcohol, I'm getting DUIs, I'm not showing up to work, I'm not picking my kids up, that sounds pretty maladaptive for the world and for yourself. That's a problem, and you're continuing to do that, that's alcoholism. If you're on your cell phone, you're missing appointments, you're not paying attention in meetings, you're looking at your Twitter feed every 5 seconds to see how many likes you got, because likes equate to dopamine. Feels good to get likes. Or you're on your Facebook being self-righteous and smashing the other person because they said that and you feel good about that and you've got rescuers coming to you. That's addiction. And yes, I 100% look at my Facebook too many times a day. Did I have any likes? I can see it today though, that's the beauty. And then I have to be accountable to it. And then I have to choose. And that's where it comes down to, choice. All right, so why is addiction? And this is one of my favorite slides. That's a missile. Human beings are relief-seeking missiles. We're trained at an early age to feel happy and feel good. Be happy, feel good. I remember being very depressed when I was 12, 13, kind of that peripubescent range, which is probably mostly hormonal, now I think about it. And my mom put, if anyone remembers, Bobby McFerrin, Fadden, something, don't worry, be happy. Yeah, something of that. And she wrote that, and she put the little clipping and put it up there. Don't worry, be happy. Oh, okay, yes, just be happy. Got it. Okay, she wants me to be happy. As parents, we want our kids. We don't want our kids suffering. How many of you like watching your kid cry or not get an award for baseball? And we don't want to do that. That hurts them, mostly because who does it really hurt? I don't like to feel. Remember, I started that off, how are we feeling today? I don't want to feel. If I feel bad, that's a problem. So my kid has to feel good so I feel good. All right. So this is kind of the crux of a lot of this talk, is adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress. And if you'd asked me, 5 years ago, did you have a good upbringing? I'd say absolutely. Did I still have a good upbringing? Yeah. If you want to compare me to some of the chaos that's out there, absolutely. My twin brother and I had food on the table. We had high-functioning parents. We played sports. There was no emotional connection in my family. I've seen my parents hug and maybe kiss one time in my entire life. So what does that kid learn? We never talked about our feelings. What we did learn early on is how to distract from feeling. We watched Dad run every morning. We also watched Dad drink alcohol every evening. We didn't really know what that meant, but clearly there was distraction going on. My mother's had numerous suicides in her. Her mother killed herself, her brother committed suicide, killed his 2 kids. So, we have a plethora of mental illness in this family. Okay? Tragedy. I was talking to my mother the other day. I said, man, I wish Uncle Bill had had access to what I have today. He'd still be alive and my cousins would be alive. Oh. So part of the reason I do this is not just for me anymore, it's for all of you. It's for our kids. which is why I chose that behavior of coming here this morning, despite my feelings and my thoughts telling me not to. Adaptive and maladaptive, we've already heard that. So for kids growing up in toxic stress with adverse childhood experiences, often their coping mechanisms are adaptive at first. You know, I started running at 6 years of age. I would run by myself before school. How many 6-year-olds run? I can't even get my 14-year-old to run. So I would run to deal with this underlining, thought and emotional issues. And I watched my dad do it, so I learned how to do it. And it felt good to run. And it worked for a while. But slowly throughout my young childhood, adolescence, and then into college medical school, I started choosing behaviors that became quite maladaptive. Okay, so that's important to understand. How do we become addicted? Addiction is a disease of the brain. The brain has normal physiology, right? Our cavemen survived because the brain had there's interconnections in the brain that tell us to do things that are adaptive, to eat, procreate, to connect with one another. That's an important concept. What once was harmless becomes harmful to the person. So my first drink, I think I was 17. I had half a beer, and that was it for high school for me. It's scary to hear meth and 33% of high school kids are drinking. That was harmless. I wasn't alcoholic, right? I had one beer. But eventually, for the addicted brain, it becomes harmful. The conscious choice when I'm 16 or 17 to have that one drink, once I've crossed into the realm of alcoholism or addiction, it's now a subconscious circuit. We're going to look at that. It's a reward circuit that's literally saying, go get more of that dopamine. And same thing goes with cell phones and social media. So I may use alcohol, but you can plug anything in there for you want. If you want to plug in victim, go for it. That works too. The self-righteous emotional addictions, same thing. It's a subconscious circuit. I always love this slide because this was what I was told drugs were on the brain, so I had to put it in. Anyway, the high school kids are like, what is that? That's what we were told when we were your age. That's what drugs do to our brain. This is what drugs do to your brain. And I put this slide in. We're going to look at areas of the brain, and I think this has maybe not. But the yellow is basically, this is a PET scan with cocaine that's injected, and you see the PET scan. This is the reward circuit in the brain, the basal ganglia, which lights up. And you can see over time how it lights up very powerfully and then goes away. So that's what cocaine does to the brain. Key players: basal ganglia, extended amygdala, prefrontal cortex. Remember, these are key areas for survival. As humans, we wouldn't be here today if we didn't have these well-functioning areas of the brain. Addiction hijacks this awesome mechanism, and then you get the outcome, which is problem. So survival, and it's hijacked. So the basal ganglia, this is the part of the brain that allows for the formation of habits and routines. Okay? Motivation to do things. I got to be motivated to go find food, to eat, procreate, collect, so on and so forth. Again, think of the cavemen when we think about this. Reward center. It has to feel good to eat, otherwise we wouldn't eat. It feels good to procreate, otherwise we probably wouldn't procreate. It feels good to connect with one another, otherwise our cavemen would have been solo out on the tundra and they would have all died individually without food because nothing felt good. So this is important that it feels good. Dopamine. The extended amygdala, part of our limbic system, this is our memory and emotional center. So this is where our positive emotional states and our negatives, and I say positive and negative. I asked at the beginning who likes to feel good. Everyone raised their hand. I asked who likes to feel anxiety. I don't think anybody raised their hand. So positive emotional states I equate to things like happiness, feeling satisfied, good. Negative emotional states, sadness, anger, depression, fear, anxiety. They also serve a purpose evolutionarily. If it didn't feel good to eat, I didn't remember where I got that food over by that tree away from the bear, I wouldn't have survived. Likewise, if I didn't know where the bear was hanging out the last time I tried to get food over there and almost died, I'd probably go back there again. So memory is important. Emotional states associated with memory. Now bring this into the 21st century, right? 2022, think of children growing up in a stressful environment that is constantly The bear's coming home every single night. I heard a doctor say that. You know, we were set up for physiology for the bear every once in a while to know how to fight or flight. What happens to that kid that grows up in a family where the bear is home every single day? Right, the bear, you know, the stress. So being high, the elation from being high, drugs, alcohol, self-righteous, whatever it is, looking at the likes on Facebook, it feels good. That reinforces the behavior of doing that behavior. So the addicted brain says, go look at Facebook 15 times a day after you do a post so that you could feel good. Okay, it's telling you, hardwired, and this is a subconscious circuit. Negative emotional states, you know, that's the withdrawal. So the alcoholic that's sweating, nauseous, throwing up, diarrhea, belly pain, that is a negative emotional state. That's causing physical ill symptoms. Their brain is subconsciously saying, go have more alcohol because it'll take the pain away. And again, plug whichever addiction you want into it. They're all the same. Prefrontal cortex, this is the big player here. This is the difference between conscious and subconscious. This is our operating center, our Windows 25 or whatever we're on. Okay? Prefrontal cortex allows us, this is literally prefrontal, meaning in the front, allows us to think, to plan, to solve, exert, you know, its executive functions, and exert self-control and decreases impulsivity. Now think of those last two words. What is addiction? Lack of self-control and impulsivity. Addiction has lost access. The addicted brain has lost access to prefrontal cortex. If you sit with the alcoholic, you sit with the drug addict, and you say, hey, you really shouldn't do this, their brain's not thinking that way. Their brain is operating at a primitive circuit of just reward, and that's it. Think about this with emails. And I joke sometimes with my colleagues how glad I am that I have self-awareness and self-regulation and prefrontal cortex engagement when I read an email, because I will read an email often and I'll go straight to victim or self-righteous and want to write something really nasty back. Every once in a while it might slip through, but for the most part, that prefrontal cortex, because of my self-awareness of my thinking addictions and my emotional states, allows me to take a breath, call a friend, hey, what do you think about this? Is there truth to this? And formulate a response, okay? The old days, it was reaction. No prefrontal cortex, just self-righteous or victim. So the addiction cycle, I feel like I'm totally blocking half the room, so I apologize, but the addiction cycle, and this is just too small for my eyes, so I gotta look up here. The binge intoxication, and you can plug any addiction you want to. You know, this is where you feel high. You know, you've got your alcohol, your drugs, your social media, you've got your cell phone, and you feel good. And then let's say you have to go to school, and the students can probably attest to this. Cell phones go away. You can't have your cell phone on at school. And you just wrote that post, and you're in this like negative withdrawal stage. You need your phone. Are people commenting on my post? Am I getting likes? That's extended amygdala, negative emotional states, memory. And that's all leading back to the prefrontal cortex, which is simply saying, go find that dopamine once again. Class is over, cell phone back in hand. Let's go back to the binge intoxication phase. And that's just a circuit. And you can plug alcoholism in there, you can plug drug addiction, it doesn't matter, it's just a circuit. We have to break the circuit. You have to understand there's a problem in the first place before we can do anything about this. So a little thing on dopamine, and this is for substance specific. So food, this is the level of dopamine on the up axis, and you can see it's about 200, about 150. So that's how much dopamine our reward circuit sees. It's the nucleus accumbens, and I'm not going to bore you with all that. When I used to do this talk, I used to bring in all the crazy physiology, and it was just too much. So let's just keep it simple. Dopamine feels good. To the addicted brain, you want more of it, okay? So food, now here's nicotine. Nicotine goes up to 150, or 250, and look how quick it goes up, very quickly. That's your vaping, that's your cigarettes, that's your dipping. And this one I really love. This is amphetamine. That's 1,000. You wonder why the brain likes amphetamine, huh? Think of all the kids we put on Adderall. Think about that. It's a whole nother talk. But amphetamine affects major change. Big, big dopamine bursts here, okay? So what are adverse childhood experiences? So Kaiser Permanente in the end of 1990s did this huge, 97 I think it was, this huge study where they really looked at over a lifetime people's risk of developing certain disease-modifying issues, behavioral issues, and they looked at what childhood was like for these individuals, and they put together basically these 10 types of adverse childhood experiences. So the first section is abuse. So physical abuse, kids that, and understand that children who have higher scores on the ACE, and if you've never done the ACE test, it's 10 questions. I recommend you Google it later and do the ACE. It's fascinating. My daughter was very high. It predicts development of issues that we'll see on the next slide. So abuse, that's a adverse childhood experience. It could be physical, it could be sexual, it could be emotional. Neglect, physical neglect, emotional neglect. I grew up in a family that didn't even acknowledge negative emotional states or even help me understand why I was feeling the way. They just taught me how to distract from them. My parents were still loving me by doing that. They didn't want to see me in pain, but they also didn't grow up in families that did it either. Did I just lose the mic? No, we're good. So understand that this is generational. Household dysfunction, mental illness, incarcerated relative, mother treated violently, substance abuse, and divorce. Okay, so all of these are predictors. And what do they predict? So some behavioral risks, lack of physical activity, smoking, likelihood of alcoholism, likelihood of drug use, likelihood of missed work. Physical and mental health consequences, severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicidality, STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and broken bones. Isn't that crazy? And this is evidence-based. This isn't someone just guessing. This has been proven scientifically. You are at a higher risk of all these as your ACE score goes up. So where the schools can be really advocative for our next generation is let's get in and really understand ACEs and how we can minimize ACEs, which is what Deb's talking about, and that's awesome. I wish I'd known about this when I was 12. So people always ask me, well, you talk about addiction and all of this. Well, what's the solution? Emotional sobriety. And some people probably never even heard this term. Emotional sobriety is this idea, and I've kind of put it into what I feel emotional sobriety is. So just take that for a grain of salt. This is my experience. Emotional sobriety is the ability for an individual to sit in their emotional state, good, bad, right, wrong, whatever it is, and not need to distract from it, not want to distract from it. Okay? Think about that. The next time you feel anxiety, can you sit in anxiety? Emotional sobriety is the willingness to move into uncomfortability for possibility. That's huge. In order for me to get well emotionally, I have to understand where my emotions come from. I have to understand where my thinking comes from. I have to have people that can support me in going into the past, identifying the breakdowns, and now affecting adaptive changes for myself. This isn't something you do on your own. Remember we talked about disconnection and connection? This is connection. This is connecting with others. This is what Deb does. This is connection. We're talking about emotions, thoughts, the behavior. We say behavior. What is the behavior associated with emotional sobriety? It's an adaptive behavior. Shocker, right? It has to be adaptive. Adaptability is moving people together, connecting with one another, loving one another. The behavior is accountability. And what is accountability? Everyone has their definition. Accountability is owning it. Owning the fact that I'm the one creating my feelings. You're not making me feel anyway. That was a hard concept. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd say, yeah, my circumstances are making me feel that way. No. I'm interpreting my circumstances. I'm generating my thoughts. I'm generating my feelings. I have to be accountable for that. What does that look like today? That looks like me going to work, having an interaction, let's say, a nurse and I disagree on something, I make her words mean I'm not a good doctor, and that looks like me going up to her, close to the incident and saying, I just used you to feel like I'm a bad doctor, and I'm sorry for using you that way. I externalize it, I take away its power. The old Andrew would have gone home, beat myself up, maybe chosen some adaptive, maybe some maladaptive behavioral patterns, right? That's how I used to do life. Be accountable to the fact that I'm generating my own feelings. People get floored by this. When you are willing to be that transparent and honest, and not doing it in a victim way, not making the person wrong for the stuff that was said, but owning your side of it. It's fascinating work. If we, and I'm just putting this out to you, if we addressed all humans' emotional and thought addictions, and everybody was choosing adaptive behaviors, would we be living in the society we live in today? Would there be school shootings? Would there be people dying of overdoses? Now, is this a lofty goal? Yes, but I don't do life any other way. So part of my crusade is to get the whole world to be emotionally sober. Move upstream, right? Do you guys get that? We need to move upstream. We focus too much on the problem in front of us. It's the alcohol. It's the drug. No, it's a thought and emotional breakdown that needs to be addressed. To address it, we have to go back into their past. We have to say, what was your life like growing up? We have to give them resources to get that and to stop using the past to beat themselves up. That's part of the issue. So emotional sobriety talk wouldn't be complete if we didn't mention emotional intelligence. Dan Goleman, he's a doctor and psychologist, I think popularized this in the 90s. It's been around since the 60s. And I like the components of it. So standing up here describing how I'm feeling, the thoughts that predated my feelings, the behaviors, this is self-awareness that I've gained by staying in this conversation for myself. That's self-awareness. You have to understand how you operate in this world before you're going to affect any adaptive change. There's people that go through their entire life and have no clue why they're always having breakdowns, because they never have access to this. Let's go to self-regulation. This is prefrontal cortex, okay? So self-regulation, the ability to have a thought, feel a feeling, and then still choose an adaptive behavior. So my daughter suffers from severe anxiety. And I always tell Isabella, I say, sweetheart, feel your feelings, but can we choose an adaptive behavior? She says, yes, I can. Fantastic. The feelings matter, but they don't matter so much that you should be killing yourself with self-harm, alcohol, drugs, disconnection. Motivation, you have to be motivated. And this is probably, people will see me in the ER, and if you know me, I am a huge advocate for substance use disorder and recovery. And I sit with patients longer than probably most docs do, and not making any other docs wrong, but just understand this is passion for me. I'll go to the ICU and I'll sit with an alcoholic. Numerous times I get called to help someone out. I have to be motivated to do this work. I can't get people motivated. They have to motivate themselves. I do ask myself one key question though, am I being someone in this world that can motivate others? I'm not going to be passive. I'm not going to just sit there and say, well, we'll just wait for that guy to want to get well. I ask myself, who do I need to be today to get that individual to see they need help? I don't always get it right. It is okay. Empathy. I wish we all had a little bit more empathy. This concept that I can stand in someone else's shoes, that I've never lived their life, and I can feel for them. That's empathy. And then social skills, socialization. We said early on that the human condition is a social condition. We want to, it feels good to be in community. It felt good, 2 years we haven't been together? You guys feel good, you feel great to be back. I think Dr. Watto said it feels good to be back in the room. Awesome, that's connection. That's the beauty of some of these programs early on, like you hear about the 12-step programs. One of the greatest things about 12 steps is not specifically what's in the book, but the fact that you bring a bunch of suffering individuals together and they connect. They connect over a common goal, which is they don't want to maybe die of alcoholism, but they're still connecting. The world needs more connection. We certainly don't need more disconnection. This is doing a really good job of feeding our subconscious desires to disconnect. So just some of the advantages of being emotionally intelligent: you can communicate effectively, you can use and manage emotions in a positive way to relieve stress, you can empathize with others, you can diffuse conflicts. Try being an emergency room doctor and a director. There's lots of conflict. Who am I being in this world to affect adaptive changes for my crew? Right? That's a fascinating conversation, and I wouldn't be able to do the job I do today if I wasn't emotionally sober. No way. Overcome challenges. So just a couple of concepts I always love to touch on. This concept of externalization. How many of you feel feelings and you hide them? You keep them to yourself. You ranger up. Yeah, just a feeling. What's the disadvantage of externalizing how we're feeling? I externalized to you how I was feeling. Did I harm anyone? Did I harm myself? No, I gave it less power. My thought addiction of not good enough, there's no truth to that. Only the truth in my head, so I externalized it. I put it out there. Often we don't tell others how we feel. The key here is, can I tell someone how I feel and not be using it in a victim-oriented or like a self-righteous type way? That's an art, okay? Our kids, you should sit at dinner with our family. We're always striving for emotional, sober conversations, and we have 2 adolescents in the house, which is awesome, by the way. It's fantastic. Yep, Jen, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, perfect minefield. But it gives us an opportunity to say, hey, how are you feeling? And then they can be, our kids can be radically honest. They can tell us how they're feeling. And then we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to enable, not adaptive. We have an opportunity to distract, not adaptive in the long run. Distraction, I'll have to put a sidebar. If you're so caught up that you cannot get out of that circuit of anger and you want to harm, go run. Go do an adapt. We bought our son a, what do you call it? One of those punching bags. It's a punching bag, but it looks like a man. And I said, look, if you're going to put holes through on my wall and break your hand, go down, put your gloves on, and punch that punching bag, right? Because when you get caught into that type of circuit, that's hard to break. But for the most part, we're not in that fight or flight response, and we have a little bit of prefrontal cortex engaged, and we can have an adaptive conversation about how we're feeling. So that's the concept of externalization. Interpretation. Every single thing is interpretation in this world. What you see here, you're interpreting it. I don't know what you're thinking. I can hypothesize. I don't know what you're thinking. If you write something, I love this, the written word, and Michelle, you'll laugh. I always tell my CEO, I say, I really like to talk. I'm not a big email person because there's too much room for interpretation. I can write what I think is a perfect response, and another individual, depending on where they're at in that day, might interpret it. I suspect they're going to interpret it in a manner that will be consistent with their emotional addiction. I will read emails and I'll go straight to, I'm not good enough. It's unbelievable how fast I can do that. So interpretation, everything is interpretation. So I asked myself today though, how do I, and it goes to the next slide, and I'll bring this up now. How do I communicate in a manner that minimizes maladaptive interpretations, okay? That's the key, and everything is communication today. Emotional sobriety is about communication in an adaptive way. How can I communicate with the world so I can affect the change I want to see? There's too many individuals that sit and they complain, but they don't do any action around it. So they feel the feelings of what complaining is, and there's no action around it. We just sit in victim or self-righteous and we just enjoy feeling bad. It's craziness. Who do I need to be in the world to affect the change I want to see? If I don't want school shootings, who do I need to be in this world to get people so emotionally healthy that nobody will actually pick up a gun ever again to shoot another person? That would be awesome. Who do I need to be in this world to have no one put a needle in their arm ever again? The drug dealers are going to be really pissed off at me. I had a DEA agent ask me, well, how do we fix the drug crisis? I said, get everyone emotionally sober. No one will be using drugs. Then we don't have to worry about it. Is it lofty? Of course. But think about it. If we were all emotionally sober and we were all okay with our emotional states right now, we wouldn't go out and choose any behavior that distracts from our emotional state. We wouldn't drink, we wouldn't use drugs, we wouldn't stay on our cell phones for hours at a time, binge watch Netflix. So communication. Communicate in a manner that is consistent with loving one another and wanting to connect. Connection's the key. Death is the ultimate disconnection. I've seen too much suicides in my own personal family. I myself tried to commit suicide at least once. Connection is the key. Wanting to connect with one another. And if you don't like someone, who do you need to be to get them to be the individual that you want to connect with? And doing it in a manner that's not self-righteous and not victim. Think about that for a second, because I'm not always right. And actually, when I disagree with someone, my growth is asking myself why. Uniformly, it's not about me. It's about what's going on for them. And am I willing to sit with someone else in their own emotional pain and really get to the bottom? Often not, because then I have to feel. And we started off this conversation with me saying, I don't like to feel. So I'm going to wrap this up with the perfectionist. I meant to get a picture of myself, but I found this on the internet. And all these, there's references at the end if you want to. I pull most of this off the internet. So let's put all this together. Thought addiction, emotional addiction, behavioral addiction. Imagine me, identical twins, wanting mom's attention, dad's attention. There's two of us, so we're splitting our parents, Dad's a busy businessman. He's flying around the world doing his graphic design. Mom's struggling, just trying to handle two chaotic, twin boys, getting them everywhere. We're competing with one another, and there's really no platform for us to understand emotional states. Okay, we're too busy. My parents weren't trained that way by their parents before them. So I'm a 6-year-old, and I've already developed I'm not good enough. We proved that, right? I've got a twin brother who beat me at X and Y. Maybe I won a few times. So I've got that thought addiction, right? I'm not good enough. Okay. Well, not good enough equates to what? For me, it equates to two major emotional addictions. Mostly depression, but anxiety started playing a role. It happened this morning. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to stand up here and sound stupid. All these things. That's anxiety, that's fear. Again, no truth to that. Walk through the emotional pain and show up for yourself. That's the key for me today. So that kid learns that he's not good enough. He develops the addictions to depression, and now he needs a behavior to relieve the pain because no one's helping him understand what depression is, what's sadness. They're putting little posters up that say, don't worry, be happy. Okay? Again, not making my mom wrong. My mom loves me. I love my mother. My dad was loving me every time he told me to draw the picture again. Because my parents wanted one thing for me. They want me to be successful. That success, that mechanism they instilled in me, came at a cost. At first, the behaviors were things like exercise, which were, for the most part, adaptive, although 6-year-olds running at 6 in the morning may not be so today. And then eventually, for me, they became maladaptive. Substances became a problem for me. Behavioral addictions became serial monogamy, dating, divorce. All this chaos in my life for about 10 years. I lived in chaos as a result of an upstream problem of thinking and an upstream problem of emotional addiction, which I just didn't really understand at the time. I went to psychiatrists, I went to psychologists, I took lots of different antidepressants, and I still showed up in the same spot, sad, depressed. I've taken no mind-altering substance in 4 years and 2 months now. Well, I have caffeine, okay, so I do coffee, but I can tell you today, I have a beautiful wife. I've got a loving daughter who's with me. I've got a robust network of friends and family that love me. I no longer have any interest in disconnecting with the world for the most part. Every once in a while it creeps back in, but I can see it today. I've got an awesome job and a very supportive community. I am a medical director of an amazing emergency department that is getting better every day, and I'm excited to go to work. You hear burnout, right? You guys all hear burnout, especially emergency doctors. We're all burning out with the pandemic. I am more excited to go to work today than I have ever been. And yes, I took over as director in the middle of a pandemic. I love my job. I love critical care. I love affecting change for patients. I love the recovery work that I do. I'm excited to wake up every single day. And you know what? I don't suffer with debilitating depression anymore. I don't suffer with debilitating anxiety anymore. Do I feel depressed at times? Yes, that's the human condition. It's okay. Can I stay accountable that I am using the external environment to feel sad? That's what I do today. Do I feel anxiety today? 100%. It's also what makes me a good physician and a good husband and a good father, is that I can feel these feelings and I can still choose adaptive behaviors surrounding them. So I think that's probably enough from me. I will put a picture of me up there someday with the perfectionist. I'm going to just share this one slide. This is a free app. It's free. My Lifelink. My brother and I developed this about 3.5 years ago. We initially started it for support of people that were struggling with substance use disorder, and now it's basically become an emotional sobriety app. An app that I do meetings on Mondays called the Emotional Sobriety Meeting, and it's a group of humans that want to feel their feelings and choose adaptive behaviors. It's affecting changes for numerous people around the world. It's pretty awesome. Feel free to download it. You can add me, Dr. Andrew. Like I said, it's all free. So, connection. That's it.
Andrew, that was one of the most powerful, when I think about presentations on the science of addiction, the why and behind it and the how do we change it, and with your personal story is so personally powerful for me to hear, as I'm sure for everyone else in this room. Thank you so much.